Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another in our series of online programs. My name is Patrice Weaver, and I am the Education Programs Manager with the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust. The Commission is a secular, nonpartisan state agency that strives to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and promote public understanding of the history. Today, we present the first in a new series on rescue and resistance during the Holocaust. Our presenter, Dan Alone, is a member of our Speakers Bureau. He is going to share 3 stories of rescue in Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II, which he calls the circus, the zoo, and the sewer. Now I'll turn it over to Dan.
So rescue, Judy had covered resistance. Today we're going to talk about rescue and their stories of courage. And one of the things about rescue, you can read the highlights there. No matter how insignificant the act was, more often than not, if you didn't do it, it could be fatal. And every story is different. Every story is unique. What's interesting is these stories of rescue took place in over 30 countries that the Germans occupied, and allowed the local countries to round up, identify, secure, and ultimately murder their Jewish citizens. And rescue is extremely important. It could be a slice of bread, a cup of water, hiding somebody for an hour, a day, a week, many times months, and often years. These are all incredible stories. I got a lot of information from the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, which is an organization in New York, and Stanley Stahl's the director. You can go to their website and find out a lot of information also. The deterrence and risks to rescue is the German use of violence. One of the things that's hard for a lot of Americans to understand is the way Germans did things. Everything was violent. Their schools were violent. Teachers were all allowed corporal punishment. So it was not unusual for teachers to correct children, which here in the States, we would consider it beating children. And that translates to just about anything the Germans did. There's also, as soon as the Germans started the war, Germany was short of food. When Germany went into any country, they immediately started confiscating food from those countries. So almost immediately, rationing started anywhere the German army went. So a choice, if you're going to rescue somebody, if it's hard enough for you to get food, how would you risk your family for them not having enough food? Also, extensive collaboration. Every single country that the Germans occupied, there was massive numbers of collaborators. One exception, Denmark had a pretty good record on less collaboration than others, but almost every single country was willingly identified and rounded up their Jewish citizens for the Germans. Also, widespread anti-Semitism. That's another whole lecture, which you've heard some of, how anti-Semitism spread throughout Europe, and especially after World War I. Then there's the practical hurdles to escape and hiding. Where are you going to hide somebody? How are your neighbors? In many cases, because food and medicine is short, Germans would offer rewards to anybody who turned in any one of their Jewish neighbors. So if your family's starving, it may be a choice that you made. We can't judge, we're just looking back, but that's one of the things that the Germans were able to use quite frequently, especially in Eastern Europe, where you had, even though many Jews were Polish citizens, they were considered Jews. They were not Ukrainians, they were not Poles, they were considered Jews. The Ukrainians hated the Jews and the Poles hated the Jews and the Ukrainians, and unfortunately the Jews were the whipping post for every one of the Slavic countries. And when we get further into one of these stories, the Ukrainians have a big part in the collaboration against the Jews. And then there's the consequences of getting caught. In Poland, for instance, since the Poles were one step above subhuman compared to what the Germans would say. In Poland, you could expect to be immediately shot. Your family would probably be shot. And in many cases, further out in the countryside, entire villages were liquidated for hiding Jewish citizens in their homes. So there was quite a bit of a massive consequence. Different countries had different penalties. In Germany, you would not be shot, but you would go to a concentration camp. And then once you went to the concentration camp, the chances of surviving from a concentration camp were very slim. In Denmark, there was no penalty for hiding Jewish citizens. So it's different in every country. And then, of course, the big question is, do I risk my family? And that is, in hindsight, we can judge or think about these things, but we really shouldn't. They're just incredible stories and incredible decisions. And one of the most amazing things about rescue is it all happened instantly. Any one of these people knocked on the door and the person didn't say, well, let me think about it, come back tomorrow, let me weigh all these different things. It was instant. Yes, I'll help you, or no, I won't. Then for the estimate is for anybody that was helping children, it would take up to 20 people to help one child hide. You had to find food, you had to find medicine, you had to get clothes. All these different things had to be done without any of your neighbors wondering why you're trying to get more food. And so for a normal person in any one of these occupied countries, food is difficult. If you're trying to get food for somebody that you're hiding, it's going to be even more difficult because you can't go to your normal food source. So for many cases, this would be an all-day event for the rescuers trying to go to different areas, further out villages, places like that, to find food so it wouldn't raise any suspicion on why you were trying to get food. So today we're going to talk about the circus, the zoo, and the sewer. And these are three incredible stories. And like I said, I'm just going to give you a little bit about it, and then you can follow up with the movies and the books. This is an interesting statement that I found in a book by Ian Kershaw, who's written quite a bit about the Holocaust. So we're going to talk about the circus. Germany was, and this rescue story takes place in Germany. Germany was one of the, had some of the greatest circuses in the world at the time. The circuses would travel all over Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And also, the interesting about the circuses, there was what you could say circuses, and then there were Jewish circuses, which is really interesting when I started researching this. And the Jewish circuses traveled more than and further distances than the non-Jewish circuses. And the story we're going to talk about today is Adolf and Maria Althoff. The Altoffs were some of the most famous non-Jewish circus owners in Germany. And during World War II, the Altoffs had actually 3 separate circuses operating. The picture you see here is Maria and Adolf Althoff. These are pictures after the war. Adolf was born in 1913, so he wasn't quite that old when he made his decision to rescue. And we're going to talk about one of the families that he rescued, but prior to the family talk about, he had also rescued some other families. The Blumenthal Circus, they were shut down and bankrupted. Many of the family escaped to Belgium and France, where they thought they would be safe. And Adolf actually hired some of them to work in his circus until the German laws then forbade them from having any Jews working in their circus. This story takes place in and around Darmstadt, Germany, right there in central southern Germany. Here's a postcard from the Circus Altoff, and then there's Maria Althoff there on the elephants. I found the original picture that this is taken from, and there's 9 elephants in the picture. So these 2 elephants that she's on are on top of 2 other elephants. It's an incredible story. Adolf Althoff was an incredible animal trainer, and his sister, Carola Althoff, married a man named Williams, they adopted a boy, or they had a boy. The stories all get confused. And you guys might remember from the 60s, Gunther Gable Williams. I don't know if any of you remember him as a circus and an animal performer, but Adolf Althoff trained him in the 50s and the 60s. Now we're going to talk about the Lorch family. And one of the things, since the mid-centuries, Jews had been part of itinerant, traveling, not necessarily circuses, but entertainment shows. And the Lorch family was one of the most famous. Their act was called Riesling. And Riesling is, today, everybody does it. You see it on Cirque du Soleil and everybody else. But Riesling was is the act where someone's on their back and then they balance acrobats above them. And the Lorch family was famous because they had one act that they could have 11 people in the air at one time. They were also able to put this to horses, do other things. Today, we're spoiled by the stuff we see on TV, but what they did was so amazing that the Lorch Circus, which was a Jewish circus, was brought to the United States. And you can see that they're featured here on the Ringling Brothers Circus circuit. They traveled here in the United States for 3 years in the 19-teens. And they were also the highest paid circus act at the time in the world. Up at the right, you'll see a young lady standing there, and that's Irene Danner, and she's going to feature in the story, which we're going to talk about. So the Lorch family had a number of, there was 5 brothers that ran the circus. In the 1920s, as anti-Semitism spread through boycotts and just pressure from the Nazi party, which was not in power yet, they started to force the Jewish circuses out of business. The Lorch family was forced out of business. 3 of the brothers and 1 sister escaped to Belgium, thinking that that was going to be safe. Eventually, they were deported from Belgium. 2 were murdered in Gurs, France, and then the other 2 died in Auschwitz. Ceci, the lady in the center of the 2 little girls, was the wife of one of the Lorch brothers. Her husband was one of the men who escaped to Belgium, but then was later to die basically of starvation in Belgium during the war. Ceci is the mother of Alice Lorch, you see there. They're Jewish. Alice Lorch is married to Hans Donner. Hans Donner was an acrobat in a number of different German circuses. She also performed in the circuses. The 2 little girls, Gerda and Irene, were Mischling, mixed race. When the family was traveling, when Alice and Hans were traveling, the girls were raised by Ceci. Hans Donner was drafted. He fought in Rommel's Afrika Korps and then was sent to the Eastern Front. Ceci was raising the little girls. In 1936, Irene was kicked out of school as the Nuremberg laws started to take effect. Gerda just stayed home. She was not in school. 1939, Irene got a job with an Italian circus working with horses. She was a beginning acrobat and also working with acrobats on horses. Eventually, pressure from the Nazis forced the Italian circus to let her go, and she had nowhere to go. But in the Altoff circuits had come back to Darmstadt for rest, recuperation, whatever, and she approached the Altoff circus to ask if they would take care of her. They immediately said yes, and she became part of it was actually called the 3 Bentos Clown Circus. She became the 4th. That's her there in the front. And she fell in love with the tall guy in the back, which is Peter. During the time that they were being hidden by the Altoffs. So you can see the other picture there, everybody standing around the circle. And you can see Adolf Althoff, Hans Donner's the small man in the shorts. That's Irene standing to his right, Peter, her husband, soon-to-be husband, and Alice. 1943, Ceci and Alice and Gerda were living in their home in Eschelbruck, which is in the Darmstadt area, and the Nazis came by and took Ceci away. Then they said to Alice and Gerda, the young sister, you're Mischling, we're going to come back for you later. So they immediately went to the Altoff Circus, and Altoff, without blinking an eye, took them in. Shortly after this, Hans Donner, this is crazy. The Germans are fighting a losing war, but they sent any of their German soldiers home to divorce their Jewish wives. Logistically, it doesn't make sense on any level, but it's insane. So Hans Donner came home and immediately found out where his wife was, and then the Altoff Circus took him in too. So now the Altoffs, and basically anybody in the circus, is risking their life, one, for hiding Jews, they would be sent to concentration camps, and two, for hiding a deserter. The Germans, I looked this up, the Germans shot almost 50,000 of their own soldiers for desertion. We shot one. The Germans also shot almost 200,000 of their own soldiers for other infractions. So when you talk about the use of violence, the Germans, nothing, they shied away from absolutely nothing. One of the things that the circuses, unlike other forms of entertainment, music, art, the Germans deemed that the circus could not, there was no way that the circus could provide poisonous entertainment. So they really didn't mess with the circuses. And the circuses that were able to operate in Germany and in the occupied countries actually financially did quite well. When the culture police and the Gestapo would come to examine the circuses when they would roll into town, Adolf would get his wife Maria, who was gorgeous, to provide them with cognac, food, and talk to them about circus stories, while Adolf would get the word out so that any of the people that he was hiding would go fishing. And Irene Danner would talk about, and Gerda would talk about, they would just go on a picnic. They would grab a picnic basket and disappear into the woods until the danger disappeared. They were able to do this until the end of the war. This is the Altoffs in 1995, around the time that they were awarded the Righteous Among Nations by Yad Vashem. And then on the right, you see the stumble stones. And the stumble stones, if you don't know what those are, they are now appearing in every country that the Germans went into. And you can see on there Julius Lorch and Ceci Lorch. So it has here, it says Ceci Lorch, maiden name was Geller, born in 1874, deported in 1943, and died in Auschwitz. Julius, he died in Belgium. Arthur Lorch, Eugen Lorch, Rudolf Lorch. So these stumble stones are all over the countries that the Germans occupied, and they're placed in front of the houses or the apartment buildings where the people last lived, where they were then deported to their deaths. Started in the 1990s, and they're everywhere. I didn't know anything about it. I was in Germany a couple of years ago, and I was walking in Berlin, and this is the reason the artist designed it. I saw something shiny. So I walked over to look at it, and it was one of these stumble stones in front of an apartment building. And so then the rest of the time I was in Berlin, I was walking with my head down, trying to find these different stumble stones. So when the virus goes away and we're able to travel to Europe again, when you go to Europe, take a look out for these stumble stones. Now, so here's something that's really interesting to show you that this was not that long ago. I live in Roswell. My oldest son lives here in Roswell, and he went to get a massage here at one of the legal massage therapists. And for some reason, he was talking to the man, elderly man, who was the masseuse, and somehow it got around to me that I lectured about the Holocaust and about rescue. And then the guy said to my son, hey, ask your dad if he's heard anything about the circus. So of course, my son said, yeah, okay. And then a couple weeks later, he happens to mention it to me. I went nuts. I was like, my God, why didn't you stop it and call me right then? Well, I finally got the guy's name. He gave me permission to give him a call. I gave him a call. and he was actually the son of Gerda, the young daughter, who was 4 years younger than Irene. Irene was the older Lorch girl. Now, Irene had 2 children born during the war. She wasn't allowed to marry. The first child, Maria Altoff, took her to a hospital because there was complications. The German doctor that did the cesarean section on her said that anesthesia is being saved for the soldiers at the front. So a cesarean section was performed on her, and then he also willfully destroyed her stomach muscles. Remember, she was an acrobat, did balancing acts off horses, so that ended her circus career. She ultimately had 5 children after the war and continued on the circus. Gerda, with the son who was the masseuse, after the war moved here to the United States. So that's the Altoffs. I talked quickly. You got a lot of information on that one. So let's move on. Here's a movie I found. I only found it in VHS, and this is in the 1990s, when basically after Schindler's List came out, when people got interested in rescue, different people started funding some of these different things. And this series of movies was partially funded by Barbra Streisand. I'm trying to find the different movies in the series, but cut at the bottom, you can see Daryl Hannah and Tim Matheson, and they played the Altoffs. When the Altoffs were given their award by Yad Vashem, Carola Althoff Williams she wasn't specifically named, but her circus also hid people. Adolf Althoff, they went fishing off into the woods, and Carola, in some of her circus wagons, they lived in these wagons, and so it would have a living room and a kitchen and a bedroom, and in between the different rooms, they built spaces so that the Jewish people that they were hiding would stand in these spaces while the Gestapo was going through. So Carola Althoff is also recognized as a rescuer. And what's interesting is Althoff wasn't recognized till 1995, so 40 years after the fact.
Thank you, Dan. If you have any questions about today's presentation or would like to suggest future topics, please email me. My email address is patriceweaver@holocaust.georgia.gov. Thank you very much.